Welcome to another episode of Austin Tech Connect. This is the official podcast of the Austin Technology Council. Now, as many of you know, the Austin Technology Council has been around since 1992, and our goal at the time was to be sort of an ecosystem builder, to bring the community together. Well, guess what? That goal still stands today. Why Austin itself is 3 times larger, and we have one of the most booming tech economies in the world, we still need to make sure that we're bringing the community together, and that's where ATC comes in. We support all of the other groups who are really promoting tech. We don't think there should be competition. We need more collaboration in Austin. Because here's the thing. Austin is not done growing. In fact, I don't even think we're halfway there. We have so much farther to go, and a growing ecosystem needs to come together and not be siloed and not have people whose agendas are fighting against each other. So ATC wants to help be the voice that brings everybody together. So now is a great time for your company to get involved with the Austin Technology Council. Now, every week on this podcast, I try to bring very interesting conversations from people in the community, some you know well, some you may not know, so that we can hear what they're doing and what they think the future is for technology and for our Austin tech ecosystem. And today, I've got not one, I have 2 guests. I am joined by Joe McCall and Nick Kairinos, and they are the co-founders of Melelem. No, I didn't say LLM, I said Melelem, and that has to do with being a mega LLM, and I didn't know what that meant. Maybe many of you don't, so we're going to talk a little bit about what that means in the world of self-learning LLMs on a big, giant level that also work with group chats. So we're going to find out a little more. So Joe and Nick, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Thom. It's nice to be here.
So, Joe McCall, I'm going to start with you. You are one of the people who founded the Austin Software Council, which grew into be the Austin Technology Council. So let's start with you and get a little bit of your history in the tech community here in Austin. Let's go in the Wayback Machine. I know you got here in the 80s, but 1992 starts Austin Software Council. How did you fit into that? Why were you involved? And what have you seen over the years of your own career growth? And how did you get to where you are now?
Thanks, Thom. Well, that's a long story to condense. I got here late 80, got a job as a rookie stockbroker with Merrill Lynch. And back then we were stockbrokers. Later they upgraded us to financial advisors because it sounded cooler and less well, I don't know what it was less than, but basically it sounded more warmer and more welcoming than stockbroker. But anyway, got out in the community, and I could see then just the very earliest glimmers of Austin being a technology city. You know, IBM was here, and Texas Instrument had moved in, but already folks at the university, specifically George Kosmetsky, at his IC Squared Institute, was seeing that this could happen, and so stayed involved, got to know George, went to the meetings at his place. And one of those meetings about Austin as a software city gathered a very diverse audience. And at the end, we said, this was great. Somebody said, if you guys want to talk about, what George suggested, having an organization for us to talk to each other, let's meet up. So me and 7 other guys showed up in a room and said, what is this thing going to be? And turned into what we originally called the Austin Software Council. Now, as you know, that's expanded to Technology Council because really software touches almost everything. But we just basically just kind of started it out of nothing. And I made the mistake, the pleasant mistake of raising my hand when they said, well, if we're going to have a meeting, we need a speaker. And I said, I know somebody. And that led to me being the program chair for the next 3 years. So I was the guy that got to pick what I thought was interesting and other people would find interesting. And because I was right more than wrong, our audiences kept growing and our members kept growing and we were off and running. So we became kind of the go-to place to network and connect for the tech community.
Nice. Well, now, you're launching this company. How did you get sort of involved with the world of AI? Because you actually started this company before ChatGPT was released. So you were into this whole AI thing before it became ubiquitous. What led you to being involved with a tech company coming out of a stockbroker background?
Well, doing what I did for the Software Council and another group, the Technology Advisors Group, I was actually program chair for both of them at the same time for 3 years.
And I remember that, and I used to attend the meetings for both.
Yes. Well, and there we go. But I was talking to the people that were inventing the future, and it is freaking addictive. You know, when you see something hit the newspaper or hit the marketplace, and the bell rings, you go, wait a minute, I was hearing about that 3 years ago, and here it is, and you realize like there's all these people here that invent the future, and like, you know, some of them are going to do very, very well, which is, you know, where my financial advisor, I said, if I know them early, when they get the big check, maybe they'll hand it to me, right? But as I learned more and more, I was becoming what I can only call a generalist. Everyone else was specializing in narrow channels, and I was talking to everyone. So I had this sort of breadth of perspective and vision that I've tried to maintain. And artificial intelligence is not a new thing. I mean, I had my first conversation with a guy almost 40 years ago. And when he mentioned what his, you know, PhD thesis was on, and I responded with a question, he practically got whiplash because I was the only person he'd ever talked to that knew what it was. So that's where it's come from. So I've always kept my eye on it. But a mutual friend introduced Nick and I some years ago, and he said he's an AI guru, and you really ought to know him. And that was the spark that led to this.
Nice. And we'll talk more about the company in a minute. But now we'll move over to Nick. So, Nick, you're not here in Austin. Where are you calling in from?
I'm calling in from Cyprus, a little island in the Mediterranean.
Nice.
Usually sunny, but really cold and wet at the moment. But
well, yeah, Cyprus is on my list of places I want to visit. I've never been. I've been to Italy, but I've never been to Greece. I've never been to Cyprus. I've never been to anything else around that area, and it's high on my list. But the reason we have you here today is because of the company that you and Joe have founded and are launching and getting out there for everybody. But let's talk a little bit about your background. How did you get started in technology, and what's your expertise?
Right. So I have my father to blame. So at the age of 10, he came home with this thing that he said is a computer. I was 10 years old. It was a Sinclair ZX80, if anyone out there remembers those. And I very quickly taught myself how to code. I admit I was a bit of a math geek, love math, love chess. So I was more indoors, and I spent most of my time on this computer, teaching myself to code. A year later, at the age of 11, I came across this concept of artificial intelligence, which is the idea that machines can learn as opposed to you explicitly programming what you want them to do. And I just became enamored from that day on, and have literally been in the field of AI since the age of 11. That was in 1981. So 44 years later, here I am. There were a few winters along the way, but AI is what I do all day, every day. I'm also an entrepreneur. I love the idea of building startups and so on. So the two just perfectly go hand in hand.
So, I find it interesting because I've been interviewing people, and in my role with HEC, I get to talk to a lot of people. How many people have deeply been involved with AI for many, many years? And of course, right now, it's the buzzword. You can't go to a conference that's not all about AI. You can't open up a browser without reading something about AI. And there's a lot of, and I'm making air quotes right now, AI experts who only have become AI experts in the last 18 months when they saw ChatGPT running wild. And so for me, it's kind of nice to talk to people who've known about this and worked in this for a long time. Every city out there calls themselves an AI center. And the reality is Austin always has been. A lot of the research that went on for IBM's Watson, which is artificial intelligence, a little different than an LLM, but a lot of that research, most of that research, from what I understand, took place at the IBM Austin facility in Austin. So for 40 years, Austin's been a town that's been having research going on around this stuff. So that all seems to come together. So you guys met, and you are now launching Melelem. So why don't you tell me a little bit about Melelem, what it's about, and maybe why it's different than ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini?
Yeah, so I'll back up just a tiny bit. We originally met to build an AI tutor, right? And we spent many years in R&D. We did a tremendous amount of great work, and we had an AI system that worked really, really well before ChatGPT sort of rocked our world and changed everything for everyone in the field, right? Because up until not long before that, I had to explain to people what AI was. ChatGPT was released. A lot of the technology that underlies it in terms of the transformer architecture and the self-attention mechanism and so on and so forth was released. And what we were doing up until that point was an approach called neurosymbolic coding, essentially, architectures. And we had to restart. We had to reboot. So we decided there's no point in continuing with the old architecture. Let's form a new company, which we did almost a year ago. We spent a year building it. And to answer your question, what is it, right? So I looked at all of the large language models that were being released. So OpenAI's various models, Anthropic's models, Gemini, all the various models that were being released, all the applications that would be built on top of those, and thought, well, the logical thing to do is just to build another LLM, right? But to do that and to get any kind of value, you'd have to build a massive model, which would require tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in compute cost and training data and resources and so on, which obviously wasn't going to happen. And also philosophically, I believe, given the background I have in AI, that the approach to getting us to the next level has to be a lot more elegant than these brute force approaches that are being used, which, by the way, have gotten us very far. So we've got these great frontier models, we've got these great foundational models, and we decided to build not an LLM, but what we call Melelem, which stands for Meta-LLM. And what makes it a Meta-LLM is that as opposed to being pre-trained, and you have these sort of annual or semi-annual releases with more and more training data and parameters and so on and so forth, our model learns perpetually real time, right? It's a post-trained, it self-fine-tunes perpetually. So every single time anyone uses it, it is learning, and it does it using a very simple process, which is simple to describe, but very complex to develop, right? And it's taken us a year to build and get to this point. What it does, Tom, so if you say, if you ask a question, the first thing it does, it says, right, let's analyze Tom's question. And, let's just say your question relates to some partial differential equations in some field of physics, and you happen to be French speaking, right? So those are three skills that the model needs to have to be able to respond to you. Our model knows exactly which sources of knowledge and which models out there are best at these various skills, because we have a scoring engine that's constantly assessing them. What it then does is it goes out and says, am I the best model to respond to Tom? And if the answer is yes, then it'll respond normally, right? It'll give you a great response, just like ChatGPT or Claude or any of the others would. If the answer is no, in other words, there's a model out there that is better at doing partial differential equations, but, in French, for instance, then it will go to those models, it'll go to those sources of data, and it'll learn. It'll gather all the information it needs, but it'll go deeper and wider than what it needs to, so that it's kind of learning everything on the fringes of that knowledge. Brings that back, and that is then trained into the model, and it's now become smarter just through your question, and then it'll respond to your question. So the big benefit of that, and I'll pause there because I'm sure you have a lot of questions on this. The benefit here is that, I don't know about you, but I pay for about 5 or 6 different models, right? I pay for ChatGPT, and most people do. Why? Because this one's better at this, and that one's better at this. And every day they sort of leapfrogging each other, and DeepSeek comes along, and all of a sudden it's at the top of the rankings, and then Grok 3 is, and so on. With Melelem, you don't need to subscribe to multiple models. It's the only AI you need, because where it lacks or where it is inferior at a moment in time to any model, it very quickly goes and closes that gap. So it becomes better or as good as the best model in any particular area very quickly. And in time, we'll expand this to other types of AI. But for now, it's focused on Melelem. So that's the premise, and there's a whole bunch of other unique features which we can get into.
So yeah, I want to dive into some of those, but I do want to back up to the thing that you were working on another company for many years, and you had a product that was there, and then ChatGPT released. I've actually talked to about, I don't know, half dozen different people in Austin and beyond who were working on similar LLM models who got blindsided by how fast ChatGPT, how quickly it released and how ubiquitous it became in just a matter of months. Joe, I'll ask you, what was it like to work so long and suddenly have all this stuff all over the media, all over everywhere, and have to pull back? I mean, what was that, like a stomach punch? What was that like?
A little bit, but on the one hand, it was like they sucked all the air out of the room, right? And so people that we were very close to closing with said, wait a second, let's take a look at this. What is this? How's it compare to you? Blah, blah, blah. And then the next one drops. But all of a sudden now, it's on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. Everyone's talking about it. And whenever that happens, the next thing is what I call the drunken sailor phase of VC investing, where all of a sudden all the people that loved what you're doing but come back when you have revenue, open their wallets and just start throwing bags of money out the window. And, you get a basket and run around and catch some. So the valuations went through the roof, well beyond what we were going to have in our financial, forecast. So on the one hand, great news. On the other hand, it showed how chaotic the market was going to be. But it also very quickly defined that there was a market and it did have large value. So now all of a sudden the conversations about should we invest in AI and at what level, that kind of went away. So now it's doable. But we also saw that the hallucination problem, the data leakage, all of these things that cause nightmares for the corporate IT guys were solvable. And we had already built in structures for our original model to cover that. But we thought we got to do a fresh start. So we minted a new company, Melelem, to go forward with the redesigned, retooled, refreshed, better model.
So that brings up a really good question, and that is you mentioned like data leakage. People are really scared to use AI because they're afraid that their proprietary data is going to end up in the greater world of AI. And the second thing is hallucinations. I will say I'm seeing in just using ChatGPT and Perplexity, I'm seeing less hallucinations than I saw 2 years ago. I was sort of accidentally an early adopter when ChatGPT released. I was at a conference that following weekend. And on Sunday, I was sitting, it was a conference for professional speakers. It wasn't a tech conference. And I was sitting with a professional speaker who said, have you heard of this? And I had, because it was all over the news. And he said, have you played with it? And I said, no. And he pulls it up on his laptop and we just start playing with it. So immediately I was sort of hooked. I signed up and I was using it, days after it was released. That being said, I did notice lots of times I had to check but verify. I was looking for something and I asked it for some sources. And then when I went to find the sources through Google, they didn't exist. So the hallucination problem, it didn't have the answer. It was making stuff up. How do you guys work around those two issues?
Yeah, great question. By the way, the models still do hallucinate. If you know what you're doing, you can make them hallucinate all the time. It's not too difficult. It's just in the nature, it's the architecture, it's the way the technology works. It's going to do that. We've got a number of techniques that we use to reduce hallucinations. One, which is a very simple one, is just think of it in terms of humans. If you've got 3 cardiologists and they're diagnosing a patient, the best way to ensure that you're getting the right information from them is to have them reach consensus, right? So have them have a conversation, and when all 3 of them are nodding and saying, yeah, we agree, then the odds of getting the wrong output is dramatically reduced. So we employ something similar to that, where when there's a response given by our model or another model, we estimate what the probability of hallucination might be. And if it's beyond a certain threshold, we'll go and get multiple opinions on it, and we'll have the models have a little chat between themselves. And when they arrive at a consensus, we'll then return that response to the user. So that in itself has done a lot to dramatically reduce hallucinations. And there's some other algorithmic approaches we have as well, which are a little bit more technical, but that's the primary approach. It's simple, it's elegant, it works. Now, ChatGPT is not going to do that because they're not going to collaborate with Anthropic and with Google and with everybody else, right? Because they are a model unto themselves, and us being a meta model, we have a lot of knowledge and information, and we know how the various models behave, etc. So we know how to have these conversations and how to reach this consensus across multiple models.
So one of my questions along that, and we might be proprietary, I don't know, but how do you get your model to talk to the other models without the other models being like, we don't want another model talking to us to get information?
Well, yeah, it's a bit of a controversial subject at the moment. First of all, it's not just models, right? So there's knowledge bases, there's websites, there's reputable websites. We also have humans in the loop that would respond to things as well. However, many models are open source. Many models are okay with you having your application retrieve responses. And by the way, they have published APIs that enable you to do this, right? So there are literally thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of applications that are hitting OpenAI's APIs every day. So in a sense, they're getting responses from these models, and those are conversations. So we look very carefully at the policies and so on of all the various models we work with to ensure we're not violating anything.
Well, Thom, in a way, you can look at our model as sort of like the old cable bundle package, where you get all the channels, but just pay one provider. That was Nick's point about we're the only LLM you'll need. It's because we'll actually be doing business with all the other ones. If we're going to go ask them a question, we're paying for the question. We're just like another customer. So because we're always going to go and get the best answer, if they're the best at that, we're going to pay them and retrieve their answer. And we just learn by doing, so that we're always playing catch up and get ahead. That's what we're doing.
And one thing I'd like to add, Tom, which is really important, is when we do provide responses, we always cite our sources. So if some model was instrumental in providing us with the information that sort of eliminated the consensus or that gave us the additional knowledge, we'll cite them as a source. So we're not hiding the fact that that response was partially obtained from this particular model from Anthropic or whatever the case might be.
So what about security? I talk to companies all the time who are like, "Oh, we're not using it very much because we're worried about the security of our data."
Yeah, no, great question. So first of all, in MelChat, which is our chat interface, there are no humans at all on our end looking at the data. So we don't do reinforcement learning with human feedback in the sense of having our teams look at conversations and look at data to provide feedback. We achieve that in a completely different way altogether. Secondly, we haven't released our enterprise version. That's going to happen in Q2. And as part of that, we're going to be releasing a sort of hybrid on-prem solution where the intelligence, the brain of Melelem sits in the cloud, call it GCP or whatever the case may be, but the actual data sits on-prem. And there's a secure protocol for transferring data back and forth in an encrypted manner so that we never, ever get to store that data. When documents are uploaded, we index them and they are stored, again, in an encrypted manner. We don't actually store documentation. So you'll never come to our servers and find any of the documents that anyone's uploaded. They just don't exist there.
So, interestingly, as I think about all this stuff, right? What do people need to know about your product? If somebody's listened, for the last 25 minutes, why do they care?
All right, I'll give you 3-4 things very quickly. So number one, it's the only model you'll ever need because it's constantly closing the gap to any others out there. So if a new model drops tomorrow, we add it to our library, if you will, and our model will learn from it what it needs to. So you don't need to keep subscribing for more and more. You don't need to keep switching. Or if you're building applications, you don't need to keep switching which models you use on the back end. Secondly, Melelem has a feature that we think is going to be one of the most powerful features in the model, and that is the group chat conversation. So imagine you're chatting to an LLM on your own, right? And in the middle of a conversation, you realize that, hey, I need to bring on someone from my R&D team or engineering team, or I need to bring the greater team into this conversation. You can invite them into the group where you're having a conversation where the AI, which we call Mel, is not just taking notes and summarizing, but is actually actively participating in the conversation. So if you address her directly, she'll participate and assist. If, for example, you say something that she feels she could add to or provide some additional information, she'll raise her hand and you'll give her the floor and she'll say, Thom, what you said was really interesting. It ties to what John said in the following sense. So it's the first LLM chat interface that has the AI in the room with a group of people, whether it be in a social setting, in a team setting, whatever the use case might be. That's another feature. Thirdly, it's the hallucination features. There's a few that we haven't discussed because they are proprietary and they're patent pending, so didn't want to get into them at this point. And fourthly, and I'll leave it at that, is that we are making Mel hyper-personalized. So you might go to Mel in the morning, and instead of it being reactive to you, the way ChatGPT and others might be, you might get there and there's a message waiting because she's had a chance to think about something you were discussing yesterday, or there's some new data that she now has access to that makes it very relevant to tell you about. So she says, Thom, I've got a few things I want to share with you. So she starts conversations. We're developing an infinite context. So she remembers absolutely every little thing you've discussed, your preferences. So it's hyper-personalized. And by the way, you can turn that off in settings because some people don't want their AI to be too friendly and too personal, and which I find kind of strange. Because
I was just thinking, it sounds like you're designing a wife or girlfriend there of that infinite memory.
But basically,
infinite memory.
it's hyper-personalized, and there's a whole bunch of other reasons, but those are the primary ones.
So, Nick, I want to ask you, right? You've been in this business of AI for a long, long time. What's different now, not just with Melelem, but just in general of what's going on, than maybe what you envisioned 20 years ago?
Well, yeah, great question. So, obviously, going back to the neural net, the sort of mass popularity of neural networks and deep neural networks, obviously that made all the difference, right? And in the beginning, myself and a lot of researchers kind of resisted it and were persisting with what we call symbolic AI. And then we shifted to sort of neurosymbolic. But there's been some landmark, massive developments, and obviously the deep learning in itself has been a massive leap forward. And then the very, very big one, which is why we're having this moment, is shifting to the transformer architecture and self-attention mechanisms and all the various other innovations that have gone into these large language models, which are the ultimate simulation machines. They're the ultimate machines that can simulate human behavior. And I think the thing that nobody expected is what happens when you scale these things. Now, there was a lot of intuition that if we scale beyond a certain level, you're going to start seeing emergent properties and you're going to start seeing intelligence beyond what's intuitive. And that's exactly what happens. So we now, whereas super intelligence and AGI and all these various terms that you hear sort of thrown around seem to be decades away or certainly beyond the horizon, are very much within our grasp because these paradigms have presented themselves, these architectures have made it very, very possible. And then you've got the precipitously dropping cost of compute. Basically, all of data known to man has pretty much been indexed, and is sitting in these models. And you've got a massive amount of interest, a lot of people, a lot of smart people going into the field, and you've got all the research that you can build upon. So I think we're accelerating at a rate that is faster than I can remember ever over the last 4 decades or so.
So, Joe, if somebody wants to find out more about Melelem, how do they find out about the company, and how do they use the product? How do they invest, et cetera?
Oh, several good questions. One, well, there's a website. What is it? Melelem.ai, and that's got the link to the what we are still in our beta right now, our open beta. We're going to be going to the subscription model. We'll be opening up in 2 or 3 weeks. Going to have that open up. All the bells and whistles, and there'll be features and stuff like that. I think right now, if you go get in on the beta, there's a chance at a free T-shirt and all like that. You got to have the cool free T-shirt, right? We will be doing an investment round on the back of the subscription opening up. We're actually looking for a CEO candidate, someone to take the reins of the operational and expansion phase from Nick. He is a great creator, but I don't want him dealing with HR and payroll. It's not best use of his time. So several things in tandem there. But hit us up on the website, and Nick, back me up on getting the address correctly. But
it's melelem.ai, so MELELEM.ai. And as Joe said, that we have a beta program at the moment where we're giving pretty cool free T-shirt to anyone who signs up and gives us some feedback. And we'll be launching in a few weeks' time, and we'll be announcing whatever we do on the website. So that's a good place to check us out.
Awesome. So as I close, Joe, I'm going to go to you, right? I always close this show talking to people about Austin, and no offense, Nick, you don't live here yet. So we'll talk to Joe. Joe, you've seen a lot of changes over the last 40 years living in Austin. Where do you think our tech community is now, and where are we going?
Well, there's been some massive changes. We literally created ourselves, just sort of willed ourselves into existence. And you were around for some of that, where the Chamber of Commerce made a trip out to California to recruit people, and it worked beyond our wildest dreams. And that's one of our problems, frankly, is we kept telling people for years how great it was in Austin, the automotive company here, and they listened and believed us, and we didn't know when to shut up. So now we've got our results are, we feel like we're overcrowded, and the traffic's even more horrible than it always was, and the cost of living's through the roof. And so basically we're like turning in ourselves into Silicon Valley with all the pluses and minuses. But that being said, we have depth and breadth of capabilities, and over the last few decades, capital availability that allows us to participate and compete at the global level. We are one of the tech cities of the world, and still just a cracking good place to live and have fun and fall in love and get married and have kids and all that good stuff like that. But our element of collaboration, which came from our early days, what helped found the Software Council, what drove our community, is this leading into ethos that we have of how can I help you? What can I do for you? What do you need to know, instead of walling it all off and trying to keep it proprietary? That, to me, is one of our greatest strengths and our secret sauce, if you will. We've got to hang on to that, and what you're doing with the Technology Council and try to really revitalize that is a big part of that. So kudos to you, my friend.
Well, thank you.
In AI, it's just the beginning. Nick has told me several times that for all that it looks like has happened in AI, if you thought of it as a map of the world, there's just one corner that's drawn in. It is a lot of just blank space. So it's going to be fascinating to see where it goes from here and how it really becomes embedded in every industry and all of society.
Yeah, I mean, I think AI has a long way to go. There's a lot more to AI than just LLMs. There's a lot more that we're all going to be learning for those of us who are a little bit more on the layman side. And there's a lot more to happen for Austin. I think the best days for Austin's tech ecosystem are still in the future. And I loved what you said, that the Austin tech scene, we willed ourselves into existence, And we told people to move here and they listened. So the only thing I can add to that is I guess Kevin Costner was right. If you build it, they will come. And they've been coming now for, 30 years, and there doesn't seem to be much slowing down happening. And so that's why it's important that in Austin, we connect. And that's why we call this show Austin Tech Connect. So Joe and Nick, thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Thom.
Thanks for the opportunity. It was great to see you again and visit, and thanks for your help on this.
Yep. And thank you to everybody who tuned in and listened. I say it every week. If it wasn't for the audience, why would we do this show? Make sure that everyone you know is checking out the episodes that we do. This season, we're really focusing on best practices by best practicers. So if you know somebody who should be interviewed and be part of the conversation here on Austin Tech Connect, make sure that you reach out. Tell me who they are, because we'd love to have them on the show. And then finally, is your company a member of the Austin Technology Council? We've never needed you more than we need you right now. We need your support. So check us out at austintechnologycouncil.org.